Snow-laced daylight filtered through the high windows of Harrington Hall, softening the crystal blaze of chandeliers into a pale winter glow as carriages unloaded velvet and title at the door. The ballroom breathed with restrained anticipation, silk whispering against marble, violins testing their sorrowful patience. Whispers moved quicker than servants. A divorced duchess walks toward ruin, one voice said. Another answered that ruin had already claimed her. In this world, disgrace did not end. It learned to linger gracefully. Every smile was sharpened for ceremony, every bow weighed with judgment, and the afternoon promised a spectacle dressed as civility. Even the air seemed complicit. She paused at the threshold as though at the edge of memory itself. A young woman of 23 dressed in dove gray, restraint rather than triumph. 11 months had reshaped her silence into strength, yet the cost lingered faintly in the careful lift of her chin. Once welcomed, she now entered on sufferance alone. No escort claimed her arm. No friendly laughter rushed to meet her. Only the disciplined quiet of judgment awaited. Still, she moved forward with a composure learned in exile, carrying not only the weight of her name, but the fragile future hidden in the gentle curve of her embrace. Its secret pulsed quietly. He stood among the favored and the feared as though carved from inherited certainty. 32 years of authority set into the severe line of his shoulders. Duty had taught him how to appear unscarred. Loss had taught him nothing at all, or so he believed. For 11 months he had governed land and name with tireless precision, yet a chamber within him remained locked against his will. The past had been declared finished under signatures and witnesses, but the heart had never learned to obey legal ink. When he lifted his gaze and found her once more, his stillness betrayed him. Memory struck with unauthorized force. Their eyes met across the ordered beauty of society, and something long buried shifted without permission. Music thinned. Conversation frayed. She held his gaze only a moment before lowering it with deliberate mercy, granting him the dignity of distance he had once imposed upon her. Pride urged him to look away. Longing refused. Around them, powdered courtesy disguised a sudden hunger for scandal, for proof that dignity might yet fracture. He took one unconscious step forward, then mastered himself too late for the movement to remain unseen. The evening tilted perceptibly at that quiet breach of control. Several hearts beat faster in borrowed anticipation of ruin. Then the careful geometry of her posture altered, and the truth she carried declared itself without words. A soft bundle shifted against her arm, and a tiny movement stirred the edge of pale cloth. Breath left him as though summoned from his lungs by command. No announcement followed, yet the revelation moved through the room with the speed of instinct. A child. Her child. The possibility he had never permitted himself to consider now stood radiant and impossible between them. The violins faltered as if startled by the collective intake of air, and the future cracked audibly against the present. No remedy waited inside tradition either. He saw at once what denial could never erase. The shape of his own blood written faintly into unfamiliar features he had no right yet to claim. Shock yielded slowly to a deeper disturbance that carried all within it. This was not triumph. This was reckoning. A life existed that could not be argued away with signatures or silence. He felt the old architecture of command tremble, its pillars tested by a truth that asked for more than authority. Around him, society leaned forward behind masks of indifference, waiting to see whether he would rise as protector or fall as coward. The choice loomed without appeal. Within her, fear stirred but did not command. She had learned the limits of fear during long months when each morning arrived without promise and each night without witness. The child's warmth grounded her to what endured when reputation failed. She did not come seeking restoration. She came because concealment had reached its end, and because truth, once born, cannot remain hidden without poisoning everything it touches. When she met his gaze again, there was no accusation in it, only the quiet endurance of one prepared to lose more if duty demanded it. That courage unsettled him most of all. It asked him to become better. The room recovered its breath in fragments, and with breath returned intent. Eyes measured distance. Lips shaped rumor not yet released. In corners of velvet and gold, the future was already being drafted by those who would never bear its cost. To claim the child would summon uproar. To deny him would deepen a wound no apology could later seal. Tradition stood ready with both shelter and sentence. He sensed how swiftly mercy could be made to look like defiance, how easily duty could be twisted into abandonment again. Every path before him exacted a different kind of sacrifice, and none promised peace, without pain yet. He moved at last, not with the presumptive authority expected of his rank, but with the careful gravity of a man approaching what might shatter him. The margin between them closed by inches that felt immense. The child stirred faintly, a small protest against the cold, and without permission from pride or protocol, he stilled the air between them with a single, unguarded whisper of her name. It was not command. It was remembrance. The sound passed through her like both wound and benediction, and the past answered with aching immediacy neither had summoned, but both still carried. The room leaned closer in shared suspension breath. She did not retreat, yet neither did she yield, and in that stillness a new boundary formed, fragile but unmistakable. Around them, the afternoon resumed its polite theater, yet everything that mattered now stood bare between two people who had once trusted too easily and doubted too long. He saw that whatever came next would not be shaped by scandal alone, but by the courage of what he chose to claim aloud. She felt the future tightening like a held inhale, neither promise nor threat yet fixed. Between them, the child slept on, unaware that his existence had reopened every closed door at once toward reckoning. The ballroom had settled into its habitual rhythm, though a tremor lingered beneath polished steps and polite conversation. Courtiers whispered behind fans and hands pressed to lips, gossip flowing like perfumed air through gilded corridors. The child, swaddled in ivory, remained tucked close to the Duchess's chest, a quiet talisman of truths yet unnamed. Eyes followed the Duke, a man of 32, as he moved among obligations and expectation, the weight of unacknowledged knowledge pressing at his shoulders. He carried the calm mask of duty, yet beneath it, a tide of reckoning pulled insistently. Each step toward or away from her seemed to measure not only distance, but the measure of his own conscience. The whispers began anew, more deliberate, sharper, forming patterns of suspicion that clung to silk and lace. Questions of legitimacy, of propriety, of broken vows, all circulated without utterance, yet every glance carried their intent. Society had always thrived on scandal, and here it found its most delicate prey. The young Duchess of 23 moved with a quiet assurance, each motion precise, measured, resisting the temptation to collapse under the weight of scrutiny. She had learned in 11 months that dignity, once lost in rumor, could only be reclaimed through patience, silence, and the careful management of perception. Every eye upon her was a battlefield she could neither avoid nor dominate outright. He approached her at last, careful, controlled, yet aware that restraint now seemed inadequate. The floor between them measured not inches, but a full expanse of unspoken emotion. The violin swelled, a counterpoint to the tension that thickened the room's warm air. The Duke extended a coat from his own shoulders, a simple gesture that defied expectation while adhering to ceremony. The act startled the onlookers, a subtle claim of protection and acknowledgement, public yet carefully veiled in propriety. She accepted it with a soft nod, a delicate balance of gratitude and reservation, as though her entire being were assessing the risk in every gesture. The child shifted lightly, stirring the moment into subtle consequence. Later, in a quieter gallery, they faced one another beneath towering oil-painted ancestors, daylight slanting softly through tall windows, catching gilded edges and silk folds alike. The room held its own hush, a space apart from scrutiny, yet imbued with the gravity of the past. He could no longer rely solely on pride. He could not command compliance. He had to engage with her as the woman she had become, tempered by absence, forged by endurance. 32 years of rank, expectation, and inherited authority had prepared him for every public battle. They had prepared him for nothing like this. Truth naked and insistent. She spoke first, her voice low and deliberate, carrying the weight of months in exile. "You believed them," she said. "You believed that I would betray what you could not defend, that I would abandon what was entrusted to me." Her eyes, steady, did not seek absolution, only acknowledgement. He felt the full force of the accusation, not in anger, but in the quiet observation of survival. She did not ask for defense. She demanded recognition of what had been willed by others against them both. His silence answered for him, though not entirely. The infant, small and unaware, shifted again in her arms. The child's faint motion stirred something ancient and unnameable within the Duke. Awe, recognition, and a sudden surge of responsibility. Here was proof, indisputable, that the consequences of months of avoidance and misunderstanding had taken tangible form. He saw features, subtle hints of likeness, and the weight of a claim he could neither deny nor fully embrace yet. His composure faltered only subtly. The room, the moment, and the child's quiet breath demanded attention beyond decorum or strategy. He was bound now not by law alone, but by blood, by undeniable consequence. Her explanation unfolded carefully, measured by necessity and survival. She spoke of doors closed by family, protection withdrawn, of exile administered with polished courtesy. Her voice never wavered in shame, though grief and endurance threaded every syllable. 11 months of separation, 11 months of careful avoidance of him and society alike, had tempered her into someone both softer and more formidable than he remembered. Each revelation unspooled in the room with the precision of a master tactician. No accusation, no demand, only presentation of facts that bore the weight of survival. He absorbed her words in silence, his mind a ledger of emotion and authority. Every phrase, every pause, recalculated his understanding of the past. Months of pride, of carefully maintained certainty, were suddenly undermined by the simplicity of truth. She had endured, protected, and persevered. He had believed in her absence, judged her by hearsay, and allowed the machinations of family to dictate the course of their lives. Recognition of this fact unsettled every carefully constructed wall he had erected. Humility, unfamiliar and unwelcome, pressed at his chest. The Duke spoke then, carefully, weighed with formal cadence, yet threaded with the tremor of vulnerability. "I see now what I could not see before," he said. "I have permitted absence to dictate the measure of my judgment, and in so doing, I have overlooked what cannot be denied." His words were not a plea but acknowledgment, a first step toward reconciliation of heart and duty. She listened, discerning, as one who has long measured the motives of others against the strictest standard of survival. The air between them shifted subtly, carrying the quiet energy of hope, tentative but persistent. He offered protection, not as husband, not yet, but as father of the child whose existence rendered all other measures insufficient. He arranged for security, for discretion, for the practical necessities that society demanded, yet that morality alone could not guarantee. Her nod in response was silent, measured, carrying both the weight of necessity and the flicker of recognition that his intentions could be trusted. In this act, the first subtle gesture of reconciliation was laid down, modest in execution, yet monumental in consequence. The gallery seemed to contract around them as the light softened and the child stirred once more, stretching tiny hands in unconscious demand. The Duke realized fully that the weeks and months of silence had allowed consequence to mature beyond rumor, beyond society, beyond his own capacity to intervene without deliberate effort. He was now enmeshed irrevocably in the fabric of her survival and the child's existence. What had once been abstract duty had become living responsibility, and the realization struck with both awe and fear. In the shadows, whispers of the past waited, contained yet relentless. Society would soon demand explanation, legitimacy, and recognition. The young Duchess, steadfast and composed, held herself with the measured endurance of one prepared to face inquiry without collapse. The Duke understood the stakes as never before. Honor, love, reputation, and duty intertwined in a lattice of expectation and consequence. Every decision, every gesture now, carried the potential to restore or devastate. He felt the gravity of their shared history press upon him with clarity and intensity. At last, they parted for the moment, moving to the threshold of the gallery, each step deliberate and weighted with unspoken promise. She entered a carriage waiting beneath the soft daylight, the child cradled securely, and he remained, gazing after them, consciousness afire with the reckoning to come. Neither had yet spoken of reconciliation, of confession, of the uncharted road that awaited their tentative trust. And yet, in that quiet parting, the first thread of a shared path emerged, fragile, precarious, and alive, hinting that what had been broken might, through courage and truth, be rebuilt. The child stirred one final time, a subtle reminder that the reckoning had only just begun, and that every step forward would demand not only honor, but the willingness to confront the past fully, without reservation. The winter morning was brittle, sunlight filtering through frost-laced windows into the great hall, turning every gilded surface into a prism of pale gold. The Duke stood alone near the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes tracing the slow drift of servants arranging the morning tea. His thoughts, however, were far from protocol. The past months had unraveled before him. In measured increments, whispers, letters, stolen glances, and the undeniable proof of his heir. Each revelation had forced him to confront his own pride, the decisions he had made in blind obedience to duty, and the family he had allowed to manipulate both his heart and his name. He felt a mixture of fear and awe. Fear for the consequences of his acknowledgement, awe at the resilience she had displayed in his absence. She arrived quietly, a shadow among the light, her gown of muted silver reflecting the soft glow of the winter morning. The child in her arms stirred, sensing the room's tension, lifting a tiny hand as though to reach for the calm he had yet to name. At 23, she bore the elegance of one who had been tested and refined by hardship. Every movement was measured, deliberate, yet not without warmth, a subtle acknowledgement that the child's father had arrived, even if the reconciliation was not yet spoken aloud. Her eyes met his with quiet resolve, a challenge tempered by hope, and he felt the unspoken question pierce the careful veneer of civility that had guided him for too long. He stepped forward cautiously, aware that any misstep could fracture the fragile equilibrium between them. 32 years of command, of inherited authority, had not prepared him for the intimacy of this moment. It demanded humility, attentiveness, and the acknowledgement that the child's presence rendered all prior calculations of pride and propriety insufficient. "I have come," he said softly, "to see that you are safe, that he is safe, and to recognize what I should have acknowledged long ago." His voice, formal yet carrying the tremor of restrained emotion, hung in the quiet hall like a bridge between their estrangement and the possibility of renewed trust. She listened without interruption, her gaze steady, as though measuring the sincerity behind each carefully chosen word. "Safety was granted by no one but circumstance," she replied, her tone even yet layered with the subtle insistence of endurance. "I have managed what must be managed, and I have shielded him as best I could from those who would see us diminished. I did not ask for your presence, only for truth to be held in the measure that I could endure." Her words were neither accusation nor plea, but they bore the weight of months of solitary vigilance. In hearing them, he recognized the enormity of what had been entrusted to her care and the quiet courage it had required. The child stirred again, a small sigh vibrating against the folds of her gown. He lifted his eyes to see the resemblance, subtle yet unmistakable, and felt the sharp pull of responsibility. The room, quiet save for the child's soft movements, became a space where past mistakes could no longer be abstract. They were embodied, immediate, and inescapable. He stepped closer, offering his hand as if to affirm presence, not command. She regarded the gesture for a long moment before allowing him the proximity, her trust measured, deliberate. It was the first tangible movement toward reconciliation, and it carried with it the promise of action beyond mere words. Minutes passed in a silence charged with memory, endurance, and the weight of unspoken questions. He considered the months in which he had believed distance and absence could shield both of them from suffering. Now, proximity revealed the fragility of that notion. She had survived, and in that survival, she had shaped a new reality he could no longer ignore. The truth of her endurance, combined with the undeniable presence of their child, demanded acknowledgement that could not be mediated by pride or society alone. Every moment, every gesture, became a testament to the necessity of choice between retreat into propriety and forward movement into vulnerability. At last, he spoke again, this time with a voice softened by recognition. "I owe you more than explanation," he said, "and more than my presence alone. I owe both of you protection, acknowledgement, and the diligence I failed to extend before. I am willing to bear the consequences of what must now be made right, regardless of the judgment of others." His words, deliberate and formal yet deeply sincere, extended beyond mere duty. They were an invitation to trust, to rebuild, and to navigate the delicate lattice of emotion and obligation that connected them. She absorbed the statement, weighing its truth with the careful scrutiny of one who had long navigated peril alone. She nodded slightly, allowing a hint of relief to soften the measured restraint of her posture. In that single gesture, he understood that the first step toward reconciliation had been taken, yet the path ahead remained fraught. Society would observe, scrutinize, and pass judgment. Family loyalties would attempt to intervene once more. The child's well-being required vigilance above all else. The act of acknowledgement, though pivotal, was merely the beginning of a longer, more demanding reconciliation. The Duke felt the responsibility keenly, and with it, the determination to act decisively yet considerately, guided by conscience rather than convention. They spent the next hour in the quiet of the gallery, arranging small necessities for the child, discussing discreet provisions, and establishing boundaries that would protect both mother and heir from intrusion. Every action, from the placement of the cradle to the arrangement of blankets, became a ritual of trust, each small gesture a reinforcement of reliability and intention. In these unspoken acts, the emotional barrier between them began to diminish, not through declarations alone, but through the tangible practice of care. In the soft daylight, the room seemed to shrink around them, emphasizing intimacy over ceremony and personal responsibility over societal expectation. The Duke recognized that this reconciliation required more than acknowledgement. It required sustained courage. He would have to confront his own pride, resist the pressure of external opinion, and prioritize what was right for the child above all else. She, too, would need to navigate her own vulnerabilities, balancing protective instinct with openness to collaboration. In their mutual recognition of necessity, they discovered the first true possibility of partnership, one grounded not in social pretense, but in shared responsibility and emerging affection. Each exchange of glance, each careful word, reinforced the fragile architecture of trust under construction. As the afternoon waned, light softened further, casting gentle shadows across gilded surfaces and polished floor. The child stirred once more, reaching faintly toward his father. The Duke bent slowly, permitting a hand to hover near the small fingers, not yet claiming, merely offering presence. She observed, a mixture of relief and apprehension threading through her features. In that suspended moment, the balance of past error and future possibility became tangible, as though the room itself held its breath in anticipation. Neither words nor titles could shape what now required delicate nurturing of heart and duty. When at last they prepared to part, it was with measured acknowledgement rather than finality. The carriage waited, and she placed the child safely within, her gaze lifting to meet his one final time. In that look, there was neither accusation nor apology, only the unspoken agreement that the path forward remained uncertain but necessary. The Duke remained at the gallery threshold, the soft winter light catching the line of his profile, his mind alive with awareness of the responsibilities he could no longer avoid. Every breath carried the weight of past errors, the promise of future care, and the silent recognition that love, though challenged, could endure. As the carriage rolled away beneath the muted glow of the winter afternoon, the child's small hand pressed against the edge of the door, a reminder of the future demanding action. The Duke watched, sensing that the reconciliation of months and hearts would require not grand declarations alone, but a continual commitment to truth, protection, and presence. The gallery seemed to echo with the weight of possibility, each shadow and shaft of light marking the delicate tension of lives poised between history and hope. And in that quiet, as the carriage faded into the distance, he understood fully that the reckoning of pride, love, and legacy had only just begun.